Welcome, fellow cosmic explorers, to the Cosmic Chronicles podcast, where imagination meets reality and science fiction comes to life. I'm your host, Quinn, and I'm joined once again by my co-host, James.
Hello.
We are brand new, so we are still looking for sponsors. As always, email us at cosmicchroniclespodcast@gmail.com if you are interested in sponsoring this podcast. You can also find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And also be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. On today's episode, we will be venturing into the hidden depths of cinematic obscurity to uncover some hidden gems of the sci-fi genre. We've picked 3 of our favorite lesser-known sci-fi movies that challenge our perceptions of reality and plunge us into a web of intrigue. From the distant reaches of space to the uncanny dimensions of surrealism, these films have left audiences both puzzled and captivated, weaving tales that linger in the mind long after the credits roll. Now, we won't be doing spoilers at first. We're going to start off by talking about these movies a little bit without spoilers, just to give some of you guys that may not have seen them a chance to learn what they're about a little bit without having it all spoiled in case you want to watch them later. But then, of course, later we will be getting into more detail and more spoilers about each one of these films. So the first film that we're going to talk about is one of my personal favorites, Moon, starring Sam Rockwell. Now, this movie came out in 2009. In the not-so-distant future, humanity has found a solution to Earth's energy crisis by mining a rare, abundant resource on the moon called helium-3. The lunar base operated by Lunar Industries houses a lone astronaut named Sam Bell, who is in the final weeks of his 3-year contract overseeing the mining operations. Isolated and lonely, Sam's only companionship comes from the base's artificial intelligence, Gertie, played by Kevin Spacey. Gertie assists him in his daily task. As Sam nears the end of his 3-year contract, he starts to experience strange occurrences and unsettling visions, which lead him to question his sanity and the reality of his situation. During one of his missions to the outside of the base, Sam makes a startling discovery: an unconscious person in a crashed rover. To his absolute shock, he finds that the person is an exact double of himself. Facing the harsh reality of their existence, they must grapple with their identity, purpose, and what it even means to be human. They collaborate to understand their predicament, and they uncover shocking secrets about Lunar Industries' operations. Moon is a captivating and introspective film that delves into the themes of identity, isolation, and the consequences of corporate greed. Now, without getting into spoilers, I'm going to tell you guys why I like Moon so much. I like the fact that it is very, very simple. It is an independent film. So they did have a limited budget when they made this movie, but it absolutely works to add to the feeling of isolation and just the feeling of loneliness. Everything about this movie just works so well. So I love it when an independent movie gets made like this and it's just really good and it's just like authentically science fiction. 2, I really enjoy Sam Rockwell's performance in this movie. I think he is phenomenal. And just the work, this is some of the best work that I've seen from Sam Rockwell. Definitely my favorite of Sam Rockwell's films. And I also think that Kevin Spacey brings an interesting quality to the character of Gertie. The artificial intelligence. I think Kevin Spacey brings something really unique and interesting to that role. So I really appreciate the acting work in this film as well. And thirdly, I think this movie is very open about its references and its influences. It's obviously very heavily influenced by 2001: A Space Odyssey. Even though it's very different, it's a very, very, very different film from 2001: A Space Odyssey. And yet the influence is very, very clearly there. So those are just 3 reasons why I like this movie. And we will, like I said, get into more detail about this movie once we can go into spoilers. So the next movie that we'll be talking about on this episode will be Vivarium. So this movie came out in 2020 and it is a great and I think often overlooked movie. Vivarium follows the story of a young couple, Gemma and Tom, who are in search of their first home. They visit a mysterious real estate agent who introduces them to a seemingly perfect suburban neighborhood called Yonder. Intrigued, they decide to follow the agent to see the house they might call home. Upon arriving at the house, Gemma and Tom quickly realize that something is off. The neighborhood itself is eerily uniform and every house looks exactly the same. But despite their unease, they go inside to explore the property. But as they try to leave, they discover that the mysterious real estate agent has vanished and that they are trapped in Yonder. All the roads seem to lead back to their house, number 9. There's no way out. The couple starts to experience bizarre and inexplicable events, including the sudden appearance of a baby boy on their doorstep. They also receive a message that states simply, "Raise the child and be released." Faced with no other option, Gemma and Tom reluctantly decide to care for the mysterious child, hoping that that will lead to their freedom somehow. In their desperate search for answers, they uncover dark and unsettling clues about the true nature of Yonder and the sinister purpose behind their entrapment. Vivarium explores themes of suburban conformity, the pressures of parenthood, and the existential dread of being trapped in an inescapable situation. Now, without spoilers, I'm just going to talk about what I love about this movie. I love the surrealism and the absurdity of this film. As soon as you enter into Yonder, we understand, well, even before that, even before we get to Yonder, we understand that there is going to be a degree of absurdism to this film. And it really, really works to add to the unsettling feeling that carries across this entire movie. I really appreciate that. I also think that the main cast of the movie does a really good job, including the child actor that plays the mysterious boy that is dropped on their doorstep. And I also really enjoy this movie's very unique vibe. There's something that's kind of offbeat about it. And like I said, that just adds to the disturbing feeling of it. And I also think this movie is very unique. There's nothing that you can really compare it to as far as like a modern science fiction flick. Its strength really is the mystery and the surrealism and the journey that you're being taken on throughout it. And I'll get into exactly more about what I mean once we can get into spoilers. So the third and final movie that we will be talking about on today's podcast is 1998's The Cube. Now, I have loved this movie since I was very young, but it's only been when I've watched this movie as an adult that I've actually understood exactly what it was about, because there are layers to this one. The Cube is a science fiction thriller that revolves around the experience of 6 strangers who awaken to find themselves trapped inside a mysterious and deadly maze-like structure known as the Cube. Many of the rooms in the Cube are booby-trapped with lethal devices, making escape a perilous and deadly challenge. The diverse group of individuals, each possessing unique skills and backgrounds, must work together to navigate the treacherous and ever-changing rooms of the Cube. As they struggle to unravel the secrets of their confinement and find a way out, tensions rise and trust becomes a scarce commodity. With no knowledge of how they got there or why they were chosen, the group must confront their fears, personal demons, and ethical dilemmas while attempting to outsmart the Cube's deadly traps. As they make progress through the interconnected rooms, they slowly uncover hints of a larger conspiracy behind the sinister experiment. The Cube is a pulse-pounding journey filled with suspense and psychological tension. And let's not forget moral quandaries. It delves into the darker aspect of human nature and explores themes of trust, sacrifice, and the lengths people will go to survive in a life or death situation. Now, what makes The Cube so compelling and so horrifying is the sense of entrapment that you feel while watching it. Now, each of these movies that we're going to talk about to some degree has a sense of entrapment through it. Moon, Vivarium, definitely, and this one. But there's something much more sinister about this one and the way it operates for some reason, because it's like the Cube is also trying to kill you at the same time. And we will go more into detail about that later on, but yeah. Also, I think The Cube has really great characters and it's got nice twists and turns. And I also think that when we get more deeper into the film and we start to get to the solutions to The Cube, I think it's very interesting, especially if you like mathematics. So those are the three movies that we'll be covering on today's episode of the Cosmic Chronicles podcast. We will now get into spoilers and get into a discussion about each of these movies, what they're about, what the ideas they're presenting about, and also just things that we like about them. And at the end, if we have time, we'll discuss a few extra movies that we have in our honorable mentions section.
So let's discuss Moon first. And now that we're getting into spoilers, what's the main twist in Moon?
So the main twist in Moon is that the doppelganger that Sam finds is in fact actually a clone of Sam. Not a clone of Sam, but a clone of the original Sam, because the protagonist Sam is also a clone. And they're just two of many clones of Sam that have existed and that are yet to be awakened, that are below the moon base. So essentially, Sam has been cloned a bunch of times. They only live about 3 years. They're implanted with false memories of the original Sam, and they all think that they have a life on the outside. Back on Earth, I mean.
So what does that mean for the story? Like, what are the implications of that?
Well, the implications of that are pretty devastating. For one, the implications for all of these, for our protagonist, is that like everything that he's thought was real is actually a lie. Like he doesn't have a wife and a daughter waiting for him at home. That's a fabrication. That was something that the original Sam had. So the implications of that is that he isn't who he thinks he is. And also, I feel like the movie pretty heavily implies, especially once you come to the understanding that there's clones, it heavily implies that Lunar Industries itself is a sinister organization, that they've been kind of pulling strings, that they've been keeping secrets, because we get to the end of the movie and there's very much this sense that this corporation needs to be exposed, and that is what Sam is intending to do once he makes it back to Earth. So I think the implications are that, Sam's identity is fabricated. He's got to rediscover his identity, and the implications are that the corporation is shady, which I guess that's a sci-fi trope.
So would you say that Moon has cyberpunk themes without the cyberpunk aesthetic?
True, in a certain sense. I think the theme of corporate greed and the evil corporation is a science fiction theme in general. It is something that definitely cyberpunk is known for, but I think in general it's just a sci-fi theme in general. So I definitely get why you asked me that, because I've been covering a lot of cyberpunk on the channel recently, Neuromancer, Snow Crash. So I understand where that question's coming from.
Do you think that Sam is the only clone on the moon?
See, that's an interesting question, because they're there to mine this helium-3 substance. And does this exist in just one place on the moon, or are they gathering it from different places? Because I kind of thought in my mind the first couple times that I watched this movie, maybe there's other clones of different people other than Sam somewhere on the planet's surface. I wouldn't put it past this Lunar Industries company. I feel like, okay, they've got the Sam clones, and they've got the Joey clones, and they've got the other clones of whoever. So yeah, I definitely see that as a distinct possibility. And in fact, I'm almost certain that has to be a thing. Like of course they would clone more than one guy.
Why would they need to clone other people if they could just clone one person? If they could just clone Sam over and over again, why not just have a Sam that does all the work?
For insurance, maybe there was some like unforeseen like defect in the Sams, and the Sams had a defect that like I don't know any reason, just for insurance, so they would have like more diversity of instead of just a single clone of a single person. All sorts of things can go wrong. I think it's more of an interesting thought to ponder on than something that there is concrete evidence for, because I guess realistically, if they are cloning him, they have a full like blueprint of his like genetic code, and they know that there wouldn't be like defects or anything. So I guess it'd be more reasonable from the standpoint of, I guess, Lunar Industries in this universe to just have Sam, but it makes it more interesting if there was more, I think.
Well, we see how much of Sam's sacrifice helps the world, but is it worth it?
That's the interesting moral dilemma. Who was it that said the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few? Is that Star Trek? Is that Star Trek where that
I
comes
was going
from?
to say that's Machiavelli.
That's Machiavelli.
Let me look that up. Oh, okay. So actually, you're right. It is Spock.
Oh yeah, Spock coming through with the wisdom.
That came from the prince.
Machiavelli can fuck off. Yeah, but
he says logic clearly dictates that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, and Kirk answers, or the one.
Mm-hmm. So I guess from Spock's perspective, maybe it's worth it. I mean, because we see in the beginning of the movie, right, that like, oh, this company is caring for 70% of Earth's energy needs and everything is so good now because we don't have energy is no longer scarce. But then also I want to bring up the fact that that opening clip that we saw kind of views like a propaganda reel also. So are we even being shown the exact truth in that moment, or is this just like the propaganda of the company? But assuming it is telling the truth, and assuming that like because of these clones, we have all this energy, we have all the energy the world will ever need. Assuming it is real, I still can't morally say that it's justified because it's a sacrifice that the clone isn't making willingly, right? This is something that's being forced on the clone. So I just can't agree with that, considering that even though the cloned Sams only live 300 years, they're still conscious beings. And you know what? Star Trek Enterprise does an episode that is literally about this exact thing. So one of the crew gets injured. They clone him so that they can get the organs from the clone. But this clone wakes up. And now this clone only has it has a limited lifespan. It has a limited lifespan. So the dilemma, the moral question of the episode is, should we force this clone to die so that the real person can live? Even though the clone says in the episode, I want to live, I don't want to die. So that's what that episode is about. Spoiler alert, I hate that episode. It's one of my least favorite episodes in Star Trek history. To me, it's an anti-Trek episode. It's an anti-Star Trek episode because I guess the solution to the episode is we force that clone to die. We force that clone to die, which I can really see like someone like Captain Picard really scoffing at that, really scoffing at that, because Picard was someone that really understood that, you know, being a person and being an individual, being consciousness matters almost more than anything. Being conscious and being alive matters almost more than anything. And that's the answer that we come to in Measure of a Man. And that's also the answer that we come to in one of my other favorite episodes of Star Trek, which is I, Borg. Picard has the chance to use a single Borg that has become conscious, that is separated from the collective, to destroy the rest of them with this virus, basically. But because he realizes that this single Borg is actually alive and is actually an individual, he doesn't do it, even though the Borg was the greatest threat that the Federation ever faced. So, I mean, even Star Trek has like varying opinions on this. It's really person to person. Spock might think one thing, Picard might think another thing, and Archer might think another thing. So it's definitely not an easy question of whether or not it's worth it. But from where I stand morally and ethically, for me, I think that it's just like, I feel like individuality and consciousness, I feel like that matters almost more than anything. If he was making the choice, if they gave every individual Sam clone a choice, then I'd be, and they said, yeah, then it would be fine. That's my personal take on that.
Do you think the original Sam agreed to be cloned?
Now that's a great question. And that is a question that I always ponder watching that movie. And I haven't seen the sequel spin-off, so this is just coming from watching Moon. I would say, yeah. If I had to guess, I would say that the original clone said yeah, because it's like it's some Black Mirror stuff, right? They grow up in a society where like clones exist, clones are a real thing, so they don't think twice. You know what I mean? You don't think twice about creating a clone of your consciousness or whatever. So I think he agreed. I think he agreed for the money, and because he's all the way on Earth, he doesn't have to think about the fact that there's like versions of himself that are conscious, that are going through this cycle over and over again. He doesn't have to think about it. And maybe he doesn't even think they're real people, because I've learned that that's a certain thing that comes up in sci-fi over and over and over again. The concept of disposable people, throwaway people. a lot of times in science fiction, clones are viewed by characters inside of those fictional worlds as less than humans that are born naturally. I always relate it back to Star Trek: The Next Generation, because we're going to have to do a whole Star Trek episode at some point. But there's a really good episode of the Star Trek Next Generation. I don't know if it's a really good episode, but it's an episode that's stood in my mind, and I'm blanking on the name of it. But it's an episode where the members of the Enterprise find out that they're being cloned on this planet somewhere, some space station or something like that. And Riker, the first officer, upon seeing his clones, kills them immediately. No hesitation, just kills them. Now, that was shocking to me and interesting to me, because I the way I see it is that clone, once it's developed, once that clone is alive, it's no longer you. It's a different person. So you don't have any say so over like who that clone is. That clone deserves the rights of any humans. That's why in the real world, like, cloning is like illegal in most places in the world, because like once it's a person, you don't have the right to keep it in your laboratory and do experiments on it. You know what I mean? But I think that like within a lot of science fiction universes, people view them as not people, because that's the way it would happen in the real world. Like if we had clones, I think immediately a lot of people would start to make that separation in their mind. Real people, cloned people. And I think that's the way that the original Sam would have probably seen it. These things don't even live. They live 3 years. These aren't humans. These aren't real people. These aren't me. So if I had to guess, yeah, he knew.
Well, since we're talking a little bit about consciousness, what do you think about Gertie? Do you think he's conscious?
Is Gertie conscious? I'm leaning towards no. I think he's just like a highly advanced AI system that's designed with a particular objective. That objective is to keep Sam safe, to help Sam. And I think that objective got like totally skewed with the appearance of the second Sam, because that was something that wasn't supposed to happen. Do you think he was conscious?
I think Gertie's kind of like the opposite of HAL 9000 from 2001. He's a good robot computer in the way that he doesn't try to overthrow or control Sam, right? Yeah, so I don't think Gertie is AI. I mean, he definitely uses AI technology, but he's limited by the fact that he's not entirely sentient.
Yeah.
His programming is simple. Look after Sam and make sure that he survives for 3 years. He's just a computer that helps Sam. Like, Gertie doesn't have motives of his own.
I think it depends on what you mean by AI too, because I think he is like literally artificial intelligence. You know, he's just like not sentient. Like he's not like alive in that way. I don't think.
He doesn't make decisions on his own. He doesn't have his own motives.
Yeah. But there is that weird scene though, that makes me question that now that I'm thinking about it. It's when Sam is trying to get into the computer, and for whatever reason, Gertie like just helps him. And then when Sam asks him, like, why did you help me later on? Like, Gertie doesn't have an answer. He's like, kind of like, I don't know.
Well, that's just his programming, right? It's just to help Sam.
That's true. Yeah. So I guess it can be interpreted a few different ways. It just depends on how you feel. But I totally agree with your point with like him being like the antithesis to HAL 9000, because I feel like he was definitely 100% written to be the answer to HAL 9000, 100%. Like he's got the smiley face. He's got like, whereas like HAL 9000 just has that single like red, that iconic like red light, which is very ominous and very like kind of soulless. Like Gertie has like the human smiles and expressions and the emojis. So yeah, he's definitely like the answer to HAL 9000 for sure. And like I said, I think his programming got broken with the appearance of the second Sam, because he knows that his objective is to help Sam, but he can't help the old Sam without hurting the new Sam, and he can't help the new Sam without condemning the old Sam to death. So it's kind of like he's in this weird dilemma. So it kind of breaks Gertie a little bit. And it was interesting to see. I personally love Gertie. I think he's like super cute and awesome. And I really enjoyed that character. He's one of the best robot characters that I've ever seen in the sci-fi movie. And I love the way he moves, right? The robot from Interstellar, right? As much as I love that character, the way it moves makes no sense. It's like on that weird, like spinny thing. It doesn't make any sense the way it moves. But Gertie it totally looks like something that could exist in the real world. And I
looks
totally
like a copy
appreciate it.
machine.
He looks like a copy machine. Yeah, and he's on that weird like conveyor belt, and he's got those arms that you'll see in like factories and things. I like the fact that he looks like something that could exist, like a robot would exist. Because like I feel like people, the Interstellar one has a good design. I forget what the Interstellar robot is named. The design is cool, right? But I feel like a lot of people, when they design robots for movies, it's always like something that looks like a person. And it's like, why would it look like a person at all? Right? So Gertie, to me, just makes so much sense. And the design of the space station itself is so cool. I really like the way the moon base looks. I mean, it looks really, really cool. So yeah, just the look of Gertie in conjunction with the moon base, it's just a vibe, whether he's conscious or not.
So let's talk a little bit about the end of the movie. How does the ending leave room for interpretation?
Well, the movie ends with the newer of the Sams getting inside of a pod and heading back to Earth. And then we hear a series of broadcasts talking about like what is going on now that he's on Earth and the chaos that's arising. So I think that ostensibly the movie is implying that there's this reckoning when Sam gets back to Earth, that things maybe start to change and now that he's exposed this. But I beg to differ. I have a different interpretation. I think the movie is kind of implying that, but I think that what's really going on, if I had to speculate, is that, nothing's actually going to change. He'll get back to Earth. He'll expose it. And even like they say in the broadcast, someone's chiming in, saying, oh, he's a crazy man. Definitely. There would be so much effort to discredit him. And given that this company, Lunar Industries, given that they provide 70% of the world's energy needs, or the United States or something like that, given that they're such a big company, this is a multi-billion-dollar company. So I feel like if this clone did get down, they would do everything they could to discredit him. And I think that's kind of what it was implying with the broadcast, that like maybe he did expose it, but he's also going to be like discredited and really nothing is going to change because also they provide all this energy. And so what are we going to do? Shut it down? And then the world doesn't have power? Like what, honestly, realistically, what is going to happen? Like they're not, cancel Lunar Industries and now 70% of people don't have power anymore? Or does the company and the governments of the world have more of an incentive to make this Sam seem crazy and to make it all disappear? And the cycle just continues again. I think that's how I read the ending. I read the ending a lot more cynically than I think a lot of people would based on it. I think it feels triumphant, but like to me, there's this undercurrent with those broadcasts at the end that just implies that like it's not over yet. And I know there is a sequel spinoff, but I haven't seen it again.
So I have a theory about this movie because when I was watching it, I noticed that the harvesters, they're all named after books from the New Testament. There's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And they had numbers after the names indicating that there was a specific quote from the Bible. And I looked it up and I couldn't find anything that was too like on the nose about the movie.
Maybe the numbers were just there because they were like numbered, and then Sam gave them the names later on.
Well, if you're a biblical scholar and you're listening to this, look up those quotes and let us know in the comments if they relate to Moon or not, because I couldn't find any sort of relation. But it did get me thinking that I think Moon, this movie, it's against organized religion. So I started putting some things together.
Or it's least critical of organized religion.
It's critical against organized religion. So Sam's term on the moon stands for our time on Earth. He implanted memories and recorded videos with his wife. They're like a religion being imposed and forced upon him that he believes. And then Sam has to behave accordingly. And if he does his job well, he is promised to travel to an afterlife of joy and happiness. Sam serves Lunar Industries, an unseen corporation in the distant sky, in my opinion, symbolizing God. And he sends out messages and assumes they are being listened to, as in daily prayers. But they're probably never delivered at all. And at the end of Sam's time on the moon, they lie down in a box, which is similar in shape to a coffin. And instead of being sent to the promised land, their body is just cremated to ashes. So I think these clones represent generations of humans who are told the same lie, all to preserve order.
I think that's such a good theory. Yeah, if you look at, well, it's not to be down on anybody's religion, but if you look at religion as a tool for control, as it has been used historically, this theory makes all the sense in the world. Like the promise of the afterlife. Yeah, the dogma that's been imposed in your head. Like if you do this, you'll get here. All of it's there, and then of course, like the very on the nose Mark, Luke, John. Like I feel like that's the first like hint, and then of course like the legions of clones that are waiting to be born. So yeah, it all makes sense to me. So I think that's a good theory, and I think it's especially good where you talk about like how he is being fed this belief, this idea of a promised land, of like the wife and kid that are waiting for him on Earth. But really, that's the life that belonged to the original Sam. That doesn't exist for him, but he believes in it so much, and it's what keeps him going. I know that some people use religion as a tool just to get through everyday life. Like life is full of struggles. So if you have this belief that you hold on to, it can really get you through a tough situation, like being stranded on the moon for 3 years. And I think that Lunar Industries like understood that, which makes it all the more sinister. They understood that they couldn't just like create clones with no memory. They had to give them hope. They had to give them something to believe in, something to strive for. Like when this is over, I can get to this place. So yeah, I think your theory is like pretty dang spot on. So like, good job with that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really, I've seen this movie several times and I've never put that together exactly. I know I heard the names, but it's almost,
there's more references in there too. Like his name's Sam, or like Samuel the prophet from the Old Testament. His daughter's name is Eve.
Mm-hmm.
I'm blanking on the other names, but I'm almost positive if I were to look up the names right now, I'm sure they would all have some sort of relation to the Bible.
Yeah. So the religious metaphor is definitely there. It's pretty inarguable when you take all of that in conjunction, like the names on the harvesters, especially, it's very clearly referencing the Bible. Like, yeah.
So a really cool thing about this movie is that the substance that the Lunar Industries is harvesting, helium-3, it's a real thing. And it's actually on our moon. In fact, there's massive amounts of it in regolith or moon dust that could be scraped up and superheated. Now, this is all speculation. It's still an unproven process, but it could potentially generate vast amounts of clean energy to supply the Earth's energy need.
And that's what we love about science fiction, because it is speculative.
So this movie could very well be in our near future.
If helium-3 actually has the properties that we expect it to have.
It does. We just don't have the technology to give us the.
So if we could develop the proper technology to utilize it, that is the barrier that we have from like.
Right. So it would need to be refined to a highly concentrated superliquid, and the concentrated helium-3 would have to be transported back to Earth for use as a nuclear fusion fuel. And they estimate that a single space shuttle payload could supply the entire United States energy needs for an entire year.
That's so awesome. I think part of the dilemma too is that like, how much of it can we bring back at a time, and like how heavy is it too? Because like that's a big problem or big question in space travel. When it comes to space travel, it's like they don't want the vessels to be like super heavy. But then again, coming from the moon, it would be lighter, right? It would be easier to take off. I'm not like an astrophysicist, so don't quote me on it.
I just know that once we get the technology to harvest helium-3, it's going to set off a new space race to capture the control of the supply.
You're right. I mean, okay. Assuming that like I know like this movie deals with like Lunar Industries being the evil corporation, but like this is assuming that like the other evil corporations on Earth even like allow it to become a thing. You know what I mean? It's kind of like how the oil industry is constantly fighting against like more renewable forms of energy. They do not want it to happen because they want people to be dependent on oil, and I feel like that's not going to go away. So I feel like we've got to get to the place where we can actually, I feel like we got to get to the place where we don't have those influences trying to stop us before we can even like think about what other evil organizations are going to come in to try and monopolize it. So it's like a never ending cycle when it comes to capitalism. And that's part of what like movies like this are exploring, you know, like that, just like the danger of like capitalism when it goes to the extreme, when it gets to the point where people are selling their DNA to organizations so that they can clone them. Like I as a society, I truly believe that we cannot allow ourselves to get to the place where it's like we devalue human consciousness to the point where just because someone lives for 3 years that we devalue them less than a regular person, you know. Plenty of people only live for 3 years. It happens. It's sad, but it happens, and it doesn't make them less than a person.
Before we move on to the next movie, I have one little fun fact about Moon. I don't know if you knew this or not, but the director, Duncan Jones, that's David Bowie's son.
What?
Yeah.
I actually had no idea. That's actually pretty impressive. That's actually pretty funny. I had no idea. I love David Bowie. That's a cool fact. So now we're moving on to Vivarium, the movie about the weird couple who move into the weird house with the weird kid.
So how do you think Vivarium plays into the fears we have about society today?
I think that Vivarium mainly plays into our fears about our place in said society. So you have this I really think that what this movie is about, it's about how like sometimes you'll have a young couple, they'll get married very young because they're told that they're supposed to get married. They'll move in together because they're told that they're supposed to live together. And then they'll end up like having a kid because like they're told like, oh, you're supposed to settle down and have a kid. And then as time goes on, they start to realize that they want different things in life. And because of the fact that they got married so young, they had a kid so young, they moved in together so young and so early, they start to resent each other. They start to resent the life that they have together. They start to resent the child. And I think that's what this movie is about, like beneath the surface, beneath like, you know, the ostensive, like, you know, they're imprisoned by like aliens or interdimensional beings. I think those are the main fears that those are the main fears that this movie is playing on.
Yeah, I think it plays on the fear of becoming repetitive and boring, like all hopes and dreams getting lost because of a few wrong decisions, or like being tricked into a situation that you end up getting stuck in.
Mm-hmm. Or even like the HelloFresh deliveries, as I call them. Like, it's just like, oh, you eat the same boring food every week, the same boring food. And like, I've done the HelloFresh thing and it's fun for a little bit, but then eventually you realize that it's like so repetitive. You're eating the same flavors over and over again that it's just boring. And I very much like when they got the box of like the food that was all prepackaged, I very much got like that sense. Like this is like the suburbia that a lot of people, I think, that are our age are like a little bit afraid of, right? We don't want this to be us because we've like seen our parents live this life. And it's like, for a lot of us, it wasn't fun watching our parents live this life. So it's like, we very much like reject this idea. And I think this movie is definitely playing on those fears of like settling down and becoming boring and like having this brewing resentment against your own family.
And this movie came out in 2020. So that's around the time where a lot of people, whether they liked it or not, were forced to live this life inside their house, getting deliveries.
Absolutely.
Living a life of solitude.
Mm-hmm. With just you and your family. I wonder how many families watched this movie during 2020 and then like we're like looking at each other thinking, oh, this is kind of us a little bit. I'm sure no one's got a kid this annoying. No one's got a kid this annoying. And honestly, I would have killed this kid. It's not a kid. It's not a kid. I don't know what this thing is, but this thing, I would not have been like being nice to it. I don't care. Yeah.
So before we talk about the kid, what is Yonder, or the Vivarium that they're in? Where are they?
I think it is exactly what the name suggests. It's a vivarium. It's like a little nursery that they built. A vivarium isn't a nursery. Like a vivarium is like it's like a fake environment that you put an animal in, like a snake or like a reptile or something. You can watch them. But it's like a vivarium / nursery. Now, if we pay attention to the first scene in the movie, what we're watching is the cuckoo bird kicking the other baby birds out. And then the cuckoo gets fed by the mom. And what was really interesting about the clip that they showed us is that by the time The cuckoo bird is even like as time goes on, by the end of it, the mom is like inside of the cuckoo's mouth. That's how big the cuckoo is compared to the mom. Like she's inside of its mouth. So the vivarium is exactly what it sounds like. It's a fake environment that's also a nursery for the quote unquote cuckoo, this little boy. So these beings, whatever they are, in order to reproduce or in order to like raise their children, their offspring properly, they need them to be raised by other organisms. So they've put these two people here to raise their cuckoo. So I don't know exactly like what the structure of the vivarium is or how it functions. It appears to be like interdimensional or something.
Yeah, I think it's like how I imagine it is like a little bubble of a parallel universe, and it's like sitting on Earth's surface. And so when you drive in, you can drive into it, but once you're inside, the laws of reality function a little bit differently, so you can't quite escape.
Yeah, and I think that something else that's suggestive that might be true is like when the boy, the creature or whatever, lifts the concrete, and then you see all of these like bending walls and weird doors. It looks like an MC Usher painting. Yeah, this is some dimension shifting technology that's happening here. It was really, really unsettling and eerie.
Yeah, so that the character Gemma crawls through a portal trying to follow the kid. She goes into another parallel bubble where they're keeping other subjects, right? And she can't comprehend what she's experiencing. It's like she isn't built to exist in that loop. She's like a foreign body in flesh, and she's eventually pushed back to where she belongs. So I feel like there's these different realities.
It recalibrates itself.
Yeah. Like there's like different realities that are vibrating on slightly different frequencies, but they're all stacked up together. So I bet Yonder, it's probably densely populated, but no one can really communicate, which kind of mirrors how some people don't really interact with their neighbors and can feel isolated in communities like this. And we've talked about this driving through neighborhoods where all the houses are on top of each other. They all look the same. It doesn't really foster a community.
And it feels fake.
Yeah.
Like we've talked about before, like how like American neighborhoods are just like fake versions of European villages. Whereas like Europe, you have like real villages, but ours, we just have like these fake villages, and then everything else is like really far away from the village. Like you can't walk to the market from an American neighborhood, generally speaking.
Do you know what ghost estates are?
Not exactly. Explain them.
Yeah. So the director of this movie, he's Irish. This is an Irish film. And in Ireland, there was an economic boom in the mid 90s to late 2000s. And they built a massive surplus of housing that mostly ended up abandoned, unoccupied, or unfinished due to a recession. So in Ireland, there's all these abandoned neighborhoods that look a lot like the neighborhood in this film. And that's what inspired the filmmakers to make this movie, were these ghost estates. Type it into Google, look up ghost estates. It brings up some creepy imagery.
There are a few things that are creepier than like an abandoned town or an abandoned neighborhood. It's just something about like something that should be full of people being empty. That's just so eerie. Like I said, like looking at if the beginning of the movie, they walk into the real estate agent and they see the models of the houses, right? Like instantly I would have been like, can I just get a picture of the neighborhood? I would have looked it up on Google or something and been like, no, I wouldn't have even followed them back just based on the look of the houses. But yeah, to each his own. They wanted, I don't know, they to each his own.
So what do you think these aliens are?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question because they're not necessarily aliens, but I guess if they're like anything non-human, then they're technically alien to us, like even if they're like interdimensional beings. But one thing that I'm pretty sure about is that the skin that they're wearing, like this human skin, is not really what they are, right? So we see the little boy kind of like show like the bulbous things on his neck at some point, almost like a frog. And we also see those images in the book that are kind of like describing his physiology, but they're in that weird alien language, so the mom can't really read what it's saying. But I think the reason they wear the human skin is because they're the cuckoo. They have to look like a cute little human child to get the mom to keep feeding them and to keep taking care of them. And they keep wearing the skin when they go out into the human world to like acquire more victims. So it's not totally clear what they are or what they look like, but like also the way like the character crawls at some point, it's just very, very strange and alien, and it implies like a totally different physiology, a totally different natural physiology to the one that it's presenting. It's not really a bipedal human. It's more of, it's something that crawls on the ground like a weird freakish crab thing.
Well, they seem to have a symbiotic relationship with humans, right? They're raised to mimic humans so that they can fit into their civilization as best they can.
Well, it's more like a parasitic relationship rather than a symbiotic relationship, because a symbiotic one would be more, it'd be influential to, it'd be beneficial to both organisms. Whereas like in this case, it's only beneficial to these alien creatures.
I also think that they've been like living in parallel with humans for a long time. Yeah. And
they've had this scheme running for a while.
Yeah. And their traps have evolved with society. So I wonder what Yonder looked like back in the 1800s.
If they were around that long.
I don't know. I feel like maybe perhaps they're not aliens at all. And there's just something else that we share the planet with.
And they've just been here parallel with us for this long. That's an interesting idea. One thing that I was thinking about is we see the real estate agent, and then we see like the little boy that grows up to be the new real estate agent. But in these parallel stacks, right? I wonder if there are different parents that are raising different aliens that are going to grow up and become different members of society, like doctors, policemen, politicians. I don't know, the person serving your dinner at the restaurant, like anybody, you know what I mean? Like we see like a very specific example, and it seems like they only live for a short amount of time. So I wonder if there was like different ones that live longer, that have different goals and different tasks. So that'd be interesting to know. Like I'd do a Vivarium sequel. We could do a Vivarium sequel.
So I kind of have a half-baked theory about this movie. You'll have to let me know. You have to let me know what you think of it. So we already established that Vivarium is an Irish movie. We talked about the reference to ghost estates. The aliens in this movie, they kind of behave a little bit like the Irish definition of fairies. Like in Irish folklore, the Tuatha were the original inhabitants of Ireland, right? Fairies are a supernatural race. They operate outside our perception of time and space. They're not friendly winged creatures. They're actually mischievous and vain and spiteful. They replace children, and people get lost in the forest and go missing all the time, and they blame the fairies.
Well, you know, if they are the Irish the fairies, it supports your theory of this being a parallel race of beings to humans. You know why? Because when according to Irish pseudo-history, Irish mythology, you had the like you said, the Tuatha De Danann that inhabited Ireland. And then when men came over from Iberia, what happened is there was a split. There was a separation between the other world, the world of the She, and the world of man. And these two worlds sat parallel on top of each other. So like all of the fairy tales and stories that you hear about like people that wander into the woods and wander slightly off the path, they're wandering into the other world. They're stepping from the path, the realm of men, and into the other realm, the realm of the She. So that's kind of what's happened to our two characters here. While traveling along a journey, they crossed over into the realm of the She and were trapped. And also there's a specific name for the baby stealers in their mythology. They're called changelings. It's a really, 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 really creepy concept of these fairies, these creatures that'll steal a human child in the dead of night when no one is watching and replace it with a child of their own. Exactly like the cuckoo. So I feel like that's not a half-baked theory. That's actually like right on the nose.
So you're saying I might be right.
I think you might be right. And it fits right in with your idea of like the parallel existence. So yeah, I don't think it's half-baked at all. I think it's great.
What do you think that boy is watching on the TV? That creepy black and white.
I wondered about that. Okay, so here's my take on that. It's something that aids in his mental development, and it could also be like transmitting information. You know what I mean? It's like, why do they tell you to put on educational television for kids? Because it aids in their mental development, and this is the alien way of aiding in his mental development. I don't know if it's directly giving him information, because he doesn't seem to become like knowing about the situation, informed about it more until like after he goes off to school or wherever he's going underneath the pavement. That's the point where he starts to act as if he like knows more than everybody else. So I think it's a tool to aid in his development, if I had to guess.
I noticed the patterns on TV, they kind of look like a map of a housing development.
What?
Yeah, well, like housing developers, they'll take a plot of land and they'll use fractal patterns to fit as many houses as they can in one area. And so if you watch the TV, it looks like you can see cul-de-sacs and streets. It looks like it's a housing development. Mm-hmm. Also, I think the TV reflects the nature of the boy. It's black and white. The boy wears black and white. And on an emotional level, he sees things as black and white.
Oh, I get it. Like he doesn't like really like see any nuance. It's like, I want my food and I'm screaming when I don't got it. And when I get it, it's here. So yeah, I get that as well. Those are really interesting observations.
So in the real world, people let their kids sit in front of the TV watching strange shit all day without really understanding what it is they're watching. And I think this can alienate parents from their children, because what media you digest at a young age becomes a big part of who you are.
I think that's a great point. And I just have to say that my parents had no idea what I was watching on TV growing up. And because I grew up in like a weird like Southern Baptist environment, that was maybe for the better, but I totally get what you mean.
I have so many piano students that have brought their phones or iPads and have shown me some just the craziest, dumbest, weirdest stuff that they find on YouTube. I'm like, what the hell is this? Why are you even watching this? What are you learning from this?
And more importantly, what do your parents have to say about this? But the answer is usually they have no idea. They don't know. They're not monitoring it.
It keeps their kid docile.
It keeps them busy. I think they were just kind of letting him watch it and not caring, because like at least he wasn't screaming with his bizarre, insane, alien, high-pitched tones while he was watching the black and white stuff. Like here's a question though about like something that happens in the movie. Why does the husband Tom start to get sick? And that's something that I have been pondering on.
I mean, they're in a totally fake environment. Mm-hmm. The clouds are fake.
Yes.
The sun is fake. Mm-hmm. The grass is fake. The dirt seems to be made out of weird chemicals. It's a place that is completely devoid of nature. Mm-hmm. And humanity seems to be moving further and further away from nature. So what happens when we cut ourselves off from anything natural? Mm-hmm. I think anyone would get sick.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a more pointed reason that he's getting sick. I think that's a part of the whole plan. You know what I mean? Because, okay, if we go back to like are comparing this movie if we go back to talking about societal fears and what this movie represents as far as like our own societal fears about our place in society, right? So the dad is digging a hole in the front yard, and he leaves every day in the morning to go out to the front yard and keep digging, working this pointless job that he like, it's meaningless. Ultimately, he's working a meaningless, pointless job and leaving the wife at home to take care of the kid. So the metaphor is very, very, very on the nose. If I do recall in the movie, as he's digging through the dirt, he's like coughing. So I feel like it's a combination of the food, because they mention that that the food tastes weird. The food makes them feel a little bit weird.
Everything like there's flavorless.
Yeah.
So the air has no smell. Fake. There's no wind.
So I feel like maybe there's something about the food that's chemically, it's rearranging their brains to make them act in a certain way. Like the mom, Gemma, right?
Yeah.
Gets very protective over the boy at a certain point, while the dad gets increasingly distant. And I don't know if that's just because of the tumultuous situation that they're in, or if it has something to do with what they're eating. Okay, back to why he dies. I think the chemicals in the dirt make him sicker, because we start to see like him kicking up, like yellow stuff is coming out. It's like, what is this? So I think that the implication there is that the chemicals in the dirt made him sick. But then the big crazy thing that happens is when we get to the bottom of it and he finds the body. That's the body of the previous dad, of the previous alien that was raised at number 9, the house number that they're at, which I really think is the dimension number. It's that they're at dimension number 9 of like this stacked layer of vivarium. But yeah, when he uncovers that body, the implication to that is that your actions have been outside of your control this entire time. You've been thinking you've been doing something unique, something that you thought of, but really the last person dug too. And guess what? They're down here now. And then what happens to him at the end of the movie? He's down there too. So I think that's just part of it. Or for whatever, I think the aliens or whatever they are know that like they're operating based off of like established human, gender roles that we've established in our society. And I guess they're operating based on the idea that like the man needs to feel like he can do something. He needs to feel like he can accomplish something, even if it's ultimately pointless, even if he's digging a hole in the front yard to nowhere, digging his own grave, even if he's literally digging his own grave.
Well, they're told that if they raise the child, they'll be released. So do you think anything would have happened differently if they paid more attention to the child and raised it better?
No, because it's a cuckoo. I think that if we follow the metaphor, then ostensibly that should be true. But I think the metaphor only goes so far because like in reality, in this film, it is a cuckoo. It's not their child. It's an alien. It's something that's wearing human skin and pretending to be. I think they were always doomed. I don't think that the aliens would have ever let them go. I don't think anybody gets let go from this. I think it's a lie. I don't think there is any release coming for them. And I think it would have went more or less the same way. I do. Because at the end of the movie, what does the creature say to the woman? He says, "You're a mother. And now you're going to do what moms do. Die." Right? That was always the plan. It was always the plan. So that's what we got for Vivarium, one of the creepiest sci-fi movies that has come out in the last couple of years. It's absolutely brilliant. I think that everyone should give it a try, should give it a watch. Definitely up there high on my list. So now we're moving on to The Cube.
Is it The Cube or Cube?
I think it's The Cube.
I think it's Cube.
Maybe it's Cube.
I'm going to look it up right now. There's no The, it's just Cube.
All right, so it's just Cube. Now we're moving on to Cube.
Cube. What do you think the Cube is?
So that is an insane question that is not really answered in the movie exactly or at all. The point is, the movie is not about what the cube is. The movie is not about like the answer to the question. The movie is about the question itself. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like we could go in a lot of circles about like trying to figure out what the cube is. Is this like something, some government testing thing meant to test certain people for certain things? Is this something that aliens made and put people in? I don't know what the cube is. I don't know what the function of the cube is. But I feel like the contemplation of it, the question, is more important than like what it is.
Well, directly related to that, what do you think the cube wants?
That's a question that I feel like is a little bit easier to answer, but not much easier to answer. Because I think the cube wants to test. That's what it seems like. Everything about the way it's set up seems like it's a big test.
To test what?
I don't know exactly. Oh. But if it was just a trap, like if this was just like Saw, just a trap, right? There wouldn't be a way to actually solve it, right? I feel like most of like, if you look at something like Saw, which I think is heavily inspired by this movie, like most of the traps, there's a way to solve it, but it's like, it's heavily skewed. So you die anyway. You're pretty much going to die anyway. But with the cube, they have all the clues. All the clues are there initially, and you could realistically solve it. So it's a test of something. And I'm not sure of exactly what, but it feels like a test of something.
So who do you think actually built the cube?
Now, this is probably the most interesting question in the whole movie. Who built the cube? And I tend to go to the side of maybe there's no one person. You have that one. So you have the three characters in this movie. You got the doctor, you got the police officer, and you got the engineer guy that built a part of the cube, right? So the doctor is convinced that it's the government. It's definitely the government. They're up to some nefarious thing. The cop is convinced that it's some rich guy playing around and it's all for his entertainment. But then the guy who actually worked on a part of the cube doesn't think it's anyone. Doesn't think there's any single person or organization to blame for all of this. This is something that got moving at some point, and it's become like kind of lost in the bureaucracy of it all, like the original purpose of it. And what I really liked in the movie is he says like, why put people in it? Someone says, but even if that's the case, and it's really this headless thing, then why put people in it? And his answer is because like it needs to have a purpose. It's like it won't be able to function if you're not using it for something. It's like there are certain systems in society that get perpetuated over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And if you look at them, you're like, this is totally pointless. Why are we doing this? We're doing it because the system perpetuates itself. It's almost like it breaks off from the people that started it and becomes an entity of its own. It becomes like this emergent thing. Like in a way, it's almost as if the cube is alive and everyone adds a piece to it. Like the guy that built the one part of the cube, he only built one part of it and he was totally isolated from everything else. He doesn't know how anything else works. And everyone else that built one part of it only built one part of it. You know what I'm saying? So there's no one to actually point to. And I feel like that's a hard concept for a lot of people to wrap their head around, how something becomes emergent. But plenty of things are emergent like that in society. It's kind of like how human beings in general, as a whole, we will sometimes act as a super organism. And no individual person has control over the superorganism. No individual person moves the superorganism. The superorganism acts independently of any individual. And I think that is something akin to what's happening here with the cube. I think that's the heaviest implication, that there are nefarious things in the world like the cube, but nobody really has any explanation and there's really no single person to blame.
I kind of thought that the cube was a metaphor for a corporation.
That's interesting because that reminds me of Neuromancer. So Neuromancer has the concept of the Zabatzes, which is a real thing. But in Neuromancer, these corporations, they're immortal because like you can get rid of a Zabatze, you can get rid of one of the leaders, but then another one just pops up. It's headless. It just keeps going and going and going and going and going and going. And like every time you create a hole, the space immediately fills itself. So I definitely can see it as a metaphor for a corporation, and it moves on its own. There's no individual person to really blame. I mean, if you fire one CEO, another CEO is going to pop up and be doing the same evil stuff. And it's almost impossible to stop. So yeah, I see that metaphor.
So why do you think these specific people were chosen for the cube?
It was because of their specific set of skills, very clearly. So the cop was the leader. The one girl was the mathematician. The doctor was empathy, well-being. She understood like that we have this amount of time before we run out of energy because of food and water. It's like she understands those things. And then they had the escape artist. You had the mentally handicapped guy that had the super genius ability to calculate the big numbers. And then you had the guy that built a part of the cube that had a little bit of knowledge about what the cube was, just a little bit more than anybody else.
Yeah.
So he provided a little bit of context.
So there's 6 characters because there's 6 sides of a cube.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point.
And I had to look this up, but all the characters are named after a famous prison.
Interesting.
Yeah. So how does one escape the cube?
So we mentioned Saw earlier. Like I said, I don't think there's a solution in Saw. I think mostly he just wants to kill you and torture you. But in this, there is a solution. And to escape the cube, you basically solve the equations and you get, it's like a really complicated Rubik's Cube. So I think you escape it by just like basically by solving it, essentially. It's pretty straightforward. And we do see like at least one character leave the cube by the end of the movie.
Right. Well, the cube is, they say it's 26 by 26 by 26. So that's a grand total of 17,576 rooms.
Mm-hmm.
They realize that the first room that they're in is 27.
Mm-hmm.
And so that gets them thinking that actually the room that we were in, it actually moves, and eventually it moves outside of the cube, and that's like a bridge.
Mm-hmm.
So if they were to have never moved from that first room,
they
could have gotten out just by staying in that first room.
And I guarantee you, whoever built the cube was certain that probably no one ever would stay in that first cube, because the human instinct is to move and explore and to look around. Like, I don't think any of us would have stayed in the first cube. So I feel like that's a weird, interesting thing that was included. It almost implies a sense of, I don't know, sadism on the part of those who built the cube. It's like they're toying with them. You know, they know that eventually maybe some of them are going to figure out that the first cube is where they should have stayed, and maybe it would be too late, and it would create this emotional turmoil. So it almost implies this degree of sadism.
This film to me it's kind of like a sci-fi horror adaptation of a famous play called No Exit.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of that play?
I haven't. Tell me about it.
It's like an existential play. It's by a French guy named Jean-Paul Sartre. And in it, there's 3 characters, and they're stuck in a room, and they're forced to emotionally torture each other with conversation for eternity. And the
Jesus.
play, the play is where that phrase comes from. Hell is other people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this movie kind of reminded me of No Exit, and I've seen it a couple times.
And yeah, this movie definitely gives you the vibe of hell is other people, because while like they're working together at first, but then eventually it becomes something else. As tensions rise, they kind of start to turn on each other, and personalities start to change a little bit under pressure. So hell is other people. I think more accurately, hell can be other people. Like other people can be fine. Other people are good sometimes, but it's just like when you put people close together and then you give them this like harrowing situation, that's when I think the hell comes out of other people. You know what I mean? You start to see like the true character of people.
When Kazan walks into the light at the end of the movie, is he really escaping? Like, where does he go?
So that's the question. I think he's leaving the cube. I'll say that. Is he escaping? Probably not. Because I question, like, who put us in this cube and why? You know what I mean? Are they really just going to let us walk out because we solved the cube?
Well, he's also the only character that wouldn't be able to accurately describe what happened to him.
Mm-hmm. And no one would really believe, probably, if he came out. Like, no one is going to take him seriously, unfortunately.
Well, also, the jail that he's named after, Kazan, is a mental institution.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that goes hand in hand. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, but ultimately, I think that what it boils down to is he is leaving the cube, but is he going to a better place? That's up in the air. I think that's the question, and I don't feel like it's necessarily answered. Like I said, this movie is more about the questions than about the concrete answers to those questions. It's more about the ideas, and it's more about having the discussion.
There's a quote in the movie that I think sums it up perfectly. It's from the character Worth. He's the guy that helped to build the cube. He says, "This may be hard for you to understand, but there is no conspiracy. Nobody is in charge. It's a headless blunder operating under the illusion of a master plan. Can you grasp that? Big Brother is not watching you."
Oh, that's so good, because a lot of people are obsessed with the thought of 1984. A lot of people haven't read it, but they talk about it as if they have. But like a lot of people are obsessed with the thought and the idea that there's this grand conspiracy happening all the time. When in reality, most of the stuff that people think is some grand conspiracy is actually just a bunch of people behind a desk. People just doing a job. It's not a conspiracy. They don't even care that much. It's people doing a job. And the system functions in a way that's detrimental. And there's no person to point to because everybody was just doing their job. So it's really eerie. And it reflects upon our society, and it makes you really, really think. It's very creepy to me.
Have you seen any of the sequels?
I have seen the second one, but when I was like 14 years old. Like, I do not remember what goes down in the second one. And I don't think it's on the same caliber as the first one. I don't think any of the sequels are. I think they also made a third one that's like totally like off the wall and doesn't even make sense. But I don't think it's on the same caliber. I think something like Cube works the best in a vacuum. It's one thing, and you don't need to have all the answers explained. And I think the impulse to make the sequel probably came from the fact that everyone was demanding answers for stuff. But with something like this, you think you want the answer, but you really don't. The point is that you don't get the answer. The point is that you think about what the answer is yourself. And the point is that you take what you learn watching the movie and try and apply it to real life and see the parallels. That's the point of something like this. Not necessarily everything gets explained in the end. And I think that's why some people might be disappointed by this movie. Because there is not a moment where it's like, this is what this was all about. You know, it does not give you that. But we might watch the sequels. It could be fun to see what they're all about anyway, even if they're not great. And you haven't seen the sequels, right?
I have not.
I
don't know if I want to. I'm content.
Yeah.
I hear they're going to remake it. Lionsgate has the rights to Cube, and they're working on a reboot, of course.
I'd be interested in a reboot because I feel like right now, at this point in time, we are very, very, very conspiracy theory obsessed, and I think we haven't been this conspiracy theory obsessed since the 90s, right? So I think it'd be a great time for like a mind-bending conspiracy The Cube movie. I think we're ready as a society for another one. I really do. But make it good. Please don't just give me some crap. Please make it as good as the first one, where it's like about mathematics and there's really something to solve here. But yeah, because what I think, when people are down on reboots, what we're really down on is crappy reboots. Don't give us a crappy reboot. Give us a good reboot. So I think all of these movies share certain themes. I think the biggest one is entrapment and solitude. That's a thread that runs throughout all of them. And definitely themes of identity in Moon and themes of identity in Vivarium as well. Paranoia is definitely a big theme in all three of these movies. Conspiracy is a huge theme in The Cube and also in Moon. And there's like a little bit of a vein of the conspiracy idea that runs through Vivarium with like the little boy and like who's ever watching over this whole thing. So we picked these three because they did share certain themes with each other that we could discuss.
Do you think that these themes mentioned are inherent to the sci-fi genre?
Not necessarily inherent to sci-fi. But I think in any good fiction, you need themes that, reflect the human experience. Everyone knows what it feels like to be alone. Everyone knows what it feels like to be paranoid or like not really like sure about like the things that are happening around you and not really be sure about like, like things like the government and to be like a little bit, to question your identity a little bit. So I think these are kind of universal themes that aren't necessarily inherent to sci-fi by itself. So there were a couple of other movies that we discussed doing on today's episode, but we couldn't get to all of them because this episode would be way too long if we did. Now, one of them that I wanted to talk about was Dark City, which is a great movie that I think is one of the main inspirations for The Matrix. It's definitely like a movie that makes you question your reality. So definitely that one. Another one is They Live. That's definitely like a mind-bending movie that's about like reality and existentialism and about like the nefarious forces that surround us in everyday society. So that is one of my all-time favorites. And I actually discussed that one in my Halloween special from last year if you want to hear more about that.
So if you really liked Cube and you're a fan of the Saw franchise, you should check out a film called Meander.
Meander is so dang stressful, and it has that similar sense of confinement that Cube has, except amped up to like 1,000. It's like 1,000%. And that one, you do get more of an answer about like what this is. You
get more answers, and I think there's a lot of twists and turns.
That's definitely
in the plot.
That's definitely like a lesser known one that I think people would like for sure.
I think it's a foreign film. I think we watched it in subtitles.
So I think we did.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. There's not that much dialogue anyway, because it's just mostly one character.
And so another one that we had was Logan's Run, that one's more popular.
I wouldn't say it's obscure, but I just think that for our younger audience, they might pass it up thinking that was just a cheesy old movie. And it kind of is, but it's got a nice vibe. It's got a vibe to it.
And just the idea behind it is freaky and interesting. And I think it's a good movie.
It's got a great score too by Jerry Goldsmith. He did the music for Alien.
And of course, Alien has like one of the best sci-fi/horror soundtracks ever in the history of the world.
Right. So give Logan's Run a chance. Another one kind of similar to Logan's Run, George Lucas's first film, THX 1138. So if you're a fan of Star Wars, this is nothing like Star Wars.
It's very weird. So THX is basically 70s sci-fi movie, the 70s sci-fi movie. It has just about like every trope in like 70s sci-fi that you can think of. So if you've never seen like a 70s sci-fi flick, definitely check out THX. It's a cool run. And also it gives you like a hint at like kind of like where George Lucas was at before he made Star Wars. Because like you said, it's like totally different, the vibe and everything.
Now, one thing I did like about it though is, and I said this while we were watching it, it sounds like Star Wars. There's certain robots and radio chatter and sound design that sound a lot like the original Star Wars movies. But THX 1138 is anxiety inducing. And there's one scene in particular that just freaked me out. And it's a scene where they open a door to this other part of wherever they're at. And it's anxiety inducing.
You just get this scene of like these rushing people that are all moving in the same direction. And like, as far as the eyes can see in like every dimension, like up and down, they're all like rushing, and it's so anxiety inducing and it's so crowded and it's so disturbing. Like, where are they going? Where are they coming from?
Especially since most of the movie is quite solitary and quiet.
Absolutely.
And then that scene happens and it's like, what the fuck?
It almost blares your mind out.
You do not expect it.
Especially because the previous scene was so like not very much happening, so still, and then you get to that moment, it's just crazy. So that's definitely one people got to check out, along with the other ones that we have mentioned in this episode. All right. So that is pretty much it for today's episode of the Cosmic Chronicles podcast. Thanks so much for joining me here, James.
It's been a pleasure. It's been great.
And again, you can listen wherever you get your podcast. Thanks so much, guys.